A shopper rejects a $20 surcharge, then accepts losing a $20 discount minutes later. Both choices cost the same, but the mind treats them as different events with different sting. Standard models assume a perfectly logical decision-maker who evaluates every option with stable preferences. Real decisions depend on context, emotion, attention limits, and rules of thumb that simplify complex trade-offs. When theories ignore those patterns, predictions break, and policies get designed for people who do not exist. Understanding the gaps helps build smarter defaults, fairer markets, and less regretful choices in daily life. In one classroom, students rated a 72 on 100 as failure, then praised the identical score on a harder exam. The numbers changed nothing, but framing shifted feelings, effort, and even how students judge the instructor. Next, we will map the human versus robot model, then show ownership, mental accounts, and self-control tools. This video is inspired by Misbehaving by Richard Thaler, and subscribe to learn why small biases reshape markets and policy. Economic models frequently begin with econs, idealized agents who compute flawlessly and never forget details. Humans, however, have limited attention, rely on shortcuts, and make systematic mistakes that recur across situations. If a model assumes perfect optimization, it cannot explain predictable errors, like procrastination or overreaction. These errors matter because prices, contracts, and rules respond to actual behavior, not to imaginary perfection. Consider a retirement plan where enrollment requires paperwork, and many employees delay even when matching money is offered. A simple default enrollment can flip the outcome, as inertia keeps people engaged once the first step is completed. This approach treats misbehavior as data, revealing where psychological forces bend choices away from textbook predictions. Once these forces are identified, models can be adjusted to forecast behavior in settings like markets, courts, and workplaces. Notice one decision this week where you relied on a quick rule, then ask what information you ignored. Writing that pattern down creates a personal map of predictable errors you can plan around. Supposedly irrelevant factors, like presentation or labels, are small details that should not change value in theory. These factors work by shifting reference points, making gains feel like losses or turning equal trades into different emotional categories. Once a reference point moves, the same outcome can produce pride, anger, or disappointment without any new information. This means that negotiators, shoppers, and voters respond to framing, so outcomes depend on wording as much as numbers. A professor once graded a test on a 100-point scale, and students called a 72 score depressing. On a harder exam, scaled differently, the same performance looked high, and complaints turned into compliments overnight. Patterns like this are not random noise. They recur whenever people anchor on a salient number. A better economics uses such patterns to predict real responses, rather than treating them as mistakes to ignore. If you must persuade or decide, rewrite the same option as a gain and as a loss. Choosing the wording that matches your values reduces accidental conflict and makes agreements easier to sustain. The endowment effect means that people value an item more once it feels like theirs, even briefly. Ownership shifts the reference point, making giving up the item feel like a loss, rather than a neutral exchange. This creates significant gaps between what sellers demand and what buyers offer, even when both started with identical items. Markets appear less fluid because people hold on to tickets, mugs, or stocks longer than standard theory expects. A graduate MBA student sold free playoff tickets for several $100s each, believing they were too valuable to use. A divinity school student with equally free tickets attended the game, viewing the seats as already his. Once loss aversion is involved, preferences no longer appear fixed, as reference points change with circumstances. Recognizing this helps explain why negotiators argue over discounts versus surcharges, and why free trials are so effective. Before making a purchase, ask whether the attraction comes from true usefulness or from imagining ownership too early. If ownership feelings distort your choices, subscribe for more tools to keep trading and deciding aligned with reality. Mental accounting explains how people categorize money into separate buckets, altering decisions even when the total sums are identical. Each bucket has its own set of rules, making spending in one feel acceptable while restricting spending in another. This can protect long-term goals, but it can also hide opportunity cost and encourage waste in smaller categories. If every dollar is treated as fungible, each choice should be compared to the best alternative use, not its label. Someone might consider a game ticket priced at $1,000 and say it is impossible to justify. The real question is what else that $1,000 could do, since any purchase comes at the expense of other uses. This perspective helps explain why budgets, windfalls, and credit card spending feel different, even when the bank balance matches. It also shows how clever rules can be beneficial, as a well-chosen label can reduce temptation and simplify planning. Create 2 or 3 categories that reflect your priorities. Then decide in advance what spending belongs in each. When a choice arises, compare it to the best alternative use of that money, not just the category limit. Self-control problems arise when a long-term planner sets goals, but a short-term doer overrides them. The mechanism is present bias, where immediate comfort is weighted too heavily compared to future benefits. This conflict explains procrastination, undersaving, and impulsive spending, even among intelligent people with clear intentions. Solutions work best when they change the choice environment, because willpower alone gets exhausted and inconsistent. In one firm, workers resisted raising contributions today, but agreed to increase saving after future pay raises. After several raises, participants moved from roughly 3.5% saving to more than 13%. This result comes from using defaults, timing, and inertia, turning known biases into predictable levers for improvement. It shows why better policy tools can outperform tax incentives, since automatic features can change behaviour even without new information. If a goal keeps slipping, add a friction reducer such as automatic enrolment, scheduled increases, or forms completed on the spot. Pair that system with a simple commitment that future raises increase saving first, so the planner gets help when choices appear. Good economics begins by acknowledging human limitations, then crafting theories and systems that align with these limits. Misbehaviour is not random. Predictable patterns emerge in classrooms, markets, and workplaces, occurring repeatedly. You observed how the economic ideal contrasts with real behaviour, and why seemingly irrelevant factors influence judgments. You also learnt how ownership affects prices, how mental accounts influence opportunity costs, and how defaults mitigate present bias. These concepts reduce surprise, making decisions more predictable and easier to improve without blaming character. They also support institutions that benefit ordinary people, from simpler contracts to retirement plans that work with inertia. Start small by changing one frame, removing one confusing label, or setting one default that aligns with your long-term goal. Then observe the results, as feedback from behaviour is more reliable than confidence in future discipline. When theory respects human nature, and better predictions and better choices become possible simultaneously. If clearer decisions and smarter policies matter to you, subscribe for more lessons that transform behavioural insights into practical habits.